Wednesday night. Happy Wednesday night in October. I can't believe we're like getting into the holidays already. It's so crazy, and I've been so absent, and I apologize. I've had lots of people sending me messages where you've been, and my caseload the past 2 weeks was just crazy, and I just didn't have the energy to do the show because it takes a lot of energy. So I'm back, and I've got my schedule back in order, so we should be back on the groove. So if I'm a little hoarse tonight, I apologize. It's just from all the talking I do all day, and then I do the show. So welcome to the Sibling Show. I can't believe I look back over the last year or two that I've been doing Liz Live Show, and I've actually never done a show on siblings and, family and family relationships and, romantic relationships are always the topic, almost always the topic of the Liz Live Show. And I can't believe I missed it, but I did. And I have 3 siblings, so it's amazing because they're very important to me, and I can't believe that I forgot. So we're going to talk about siblings tonight. There's so many topics and so much interesting stuff. And hello, Catherine, and hello, Amy. Catherine gave me the idea. And so, Catherine, feel free to participate. Amy, feel free to participate. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking first, and then we're going to get into, opening it up for questions and comments, and hopefully I can answer people's questions and help you guys with some, pointers or some advice to deal with different issues that you may have with your brothers or sisters. So I jotted down so much to talk about tonight. So let's just start at the beginning, where I always like to start. And let's talk about siblings, because siblings are very unique, have a very unique dynamic, and they're very unique beings in the sense that brothers and sisters share the basic the creators of us are only the same, typically, if you're not adopted or if it's not a step issue, which that really doesn't matter. Blood doesn't necessarily matter. But brothers and sisters basically are the only beings on the earth that are made up of the same 2 people that you are. So the genetics are there. They're undeniable. The growing up in the same household with your brothers and sisters, and that emotional experience of going through the same things as each other. And your brothers and sisters, siblings, are the only people who really journey through the emotional experience of your life, literally with you, under the same roof, spawned from the same 2 people. So there's certainly a connection on many levels for siblings. There's the heredity that binds you together. There's the genetics and the heredity that bind you together. There's the, experience of growing up in the same house and being raised by the same parents that, is a shared experience that no one else in the world has besides you and your siblings. And then, of course, there's the perspective that siblings have of your parents. And so many times I work with families where siblings will have completely different perspectives of their childhood than the other when, they were all in the same house. And, of course, I'm always speaking in generalities because, there are siblings that have large age differences, and that maybe you're half brothers or they're half sisters or they're step siblings or they're adopted, but you all grow up in that same environment and have exposure to a lot of the same influences. And that's something very significant and very special that brothers and sisters have in common. And so there's a very special bond between brothers and sisters. And we, again, like any other family relationship that we've talked about on this show, when those relationships don't turn out the way we want, it can be very devastating, especially when it's family. But focusing on the brother-sister dynamic, there are certain dynamics that make sibling relationships so special beyond what I just mentioned. and why it can be just so painful and devastating when those relationships do not stay intact. So beyond the genetics and the shared experiences and the familiarity and the, growing up in the same households and exposure to all the same influences, brothers and sisters are, after the parents, they're our very first exposure to people of the opposite sex, perhaps. Maybe you're all sisters or all brothers, but they're your first friendships. They're your very first friendships. And, I can think back to, so many wonderful times with all of my brothers and how each one of them played, a different role in my life. And my younger brother and I were very close in age, so we really experienced a lot of things together. So there's a special connection there. And my older brothers, I have a brother who's 13 years older, a brother who's 10 years older, and a brother who's 3 years younger. And, there's a big age difference, so obviously our experiences of our parents are different. And my father had my older two brothers with his first wife, but my mother basically raised them. So all four of us grew up in the same house, and I was so much younger, as was my little brother, that, we didn't understand. At least I certainly never understood that they were, half or what that even meant. They were my brothers, and I was devastated when I found out that we didn't have the same parents. I had no idea. So there's that special connection, and they were my first experiences really with friendship. And so brothers and sisters are, they're family, but they're really friends, because unlike our parents or our grandparents and, older aunts and uncles who had some authority or, some sort of, authority figure or parental figure in our lives, brothers and sisters really don't. And they're our buddies. They, we wake up with them, we watch TV, we, watch movies, we watch mom and dad go through things together. And I think in families that are, mildly functional, we grow very close to our siblings. And as we age and we develop and we go through these experiences with our siblings, sometimes things don't quite, turn out the way we were hoping. But let's not get into the negative yet. Let's stay with the positive. So they're our first buddies, our first friends. And I bet as I'm talking, everyone who's watching can think about, playing and running around with their brothers and sisters in the neighborhoods, especially, if you're my age or older, where it was actually safe to, run around and bike. And, my little brother and I, we used to get on our bikes down here in South Florida, and we would, bike for hours. We'd be gone for hours. And, we were best buddies. We had to do everything together. We were so close in age, and we were raised largely by a single mom. And so it was like the three of us. And then my older brothers I was always very close to them too, but they were a lot older. So I really looked up to my brothers. So if you're a younger sibling, I'm both an older and a younger. So I have a unique experience where I was the little sister and I was the big sister. And I'm sure that all of you watching, probably have some interesting dynamics with your siblings. But again, I had two older and one younger, so I played a couple different roles. And studies show that the older siblings tend to be, quite obviously the most authoritative, because they're second in command to mom and dad, right? They're the first ones that, they wear out your parents for you. They get your parents' feet wet in parenting, and they kind of pave the way for the younger siblings. And the younger siblings will tend to follow or model their older brothers and sisters, or come to understand that their friendships and their relationships should probably look something like their sibling relationships. So it's so significant. Again, for all the reasons that I'm saying and so much more. So in the context of this show, think of your siblings as your first friends. And they really, truly are. And even if you fought all the time and didn't get along with them, they were your first friends. And if you go back to those relationships and look at your sibling relationships, it'll probably tell you an awful lot about the friendships that you picked and the roles that you played in your life, and who you went on to pick in your romantic relationships. And so all of the things that happen within the sibling dynamic lay groundwork for all of our relationships. And I think it's a dynamic that gets really overshadowed, and we always focus on mom and dad, mom and dad, mom and dad. But brothers and sisters are a huge part of our archetype for the opposite sex, and our sort of template for what friendship and relationships should look like. And I know I've always had a lot of male friends, I think because I had so many brothers that I was able to just have that boundary and be friends with men without it being, sexual necessarily, because, I had all those brothers, and it's very comfortable for me to hang out with men. It's not scary or intimidating for me like it might be for some girls who never had brothers or didn't grow up around a lot of men. So for me, it was no big deal. And if I look at my oldest brother, he was a bodybuilder at one time, and he was, big and strong and kind of wild. And, a lot of my boyfriends kind of look like that, just saying. So I think sometimes we don't realize it. And they say, you marry your mother, you marry your father, but look at your siblings, because there's a lot to that too. And we have the birth order, which is always interesting. So if you're looking at yourself or you're looking at your siblings, were you the baby? Were you the oldest? Were you the middle child? And these are things that I always look at when I'm doing counseling and family counseling, because a lot of times it can say so much about person's personality. The baby of the family often is the one who maybe is more spoiled or more babied. But what I've noticed is oftentimes the youngest child winds up being closest to the parents, because all the other siblings have, sort of flown the nest, and they stick around to take care of their parents. And, the older siblings kind of, set a certain standard for what's expected of the other kids, and, are role models for their younger siblings. And probably a lot of the older siblings don't realize that when it's happening, or they forget about it. My other older brother, Carrie, I absolutely idolized. I probably still do. He's my best friend, and I just adore him. And we have had such a special relationship my whole life. And in other ways, I've never been able to find anyone who could measure up to him. I'm still working on it. But he's very, very special. And my family and all the things that we went through, my brothers were, such a wonderful, most of the time, a really good support system. But of course, there were other times where it didn't go as smoothly. So thinking back to childhood, I think we all really sort of overlook a lot of the importance of our siblings and the roles that they have played in our relationship development and in our own development. And when we look at our parents and we think about our parents as being mirrors for us, well, think about your brothers and sisters, right? So a lot of times I might meet someone who felt like they couldn't compare to their older brother or their younger brother, because maybe the older brothers had certain talents, or the older sisters had beauty and they didn't, or brains and they didn't, and had lots of boyfriends and girlfriends and they didn't. And so we're constantly comparing ourselves in some ways, whether for positive or negative reasons, to our siblings. And this is going on all of our life. It's going on subconsciously from the moment we meet our brothers and sisters till death do you part, right? It's this constant mirror. And some people are so blessed and so lucky to have very close friendships with their siblings forever. I meet clients and friends who, are sisters are best friends, the brothers are best friends, they live near each other, they do everything together, and it's really wonderful. And then other cases, not so much. One sibling who, for example, has a lot of emotional problems or a drug problem can really wreck a family. Again, because families are also interdependent on each other and constantly mirroring each other, whether they realize it or not. So if you have, for example, someone in the family who's got mental health issues or drug issues or health issues, the attention from the parents tends to be kind of absorbed by that child, and the other children will sometimes get neglected because they're not as in need of attention as that one sibling. So that one sibling with issues or problems can really shake up and sort of be a tornado in a sense, and can be very destructive or very traumatic for everyone else around. And I see a lot of times that, middle children do really get left out. And, a lot of people think that, oh, that's just a myth. But I personally, from what I've seen in my own family and what I've seen in the world and in my clients in my office, middle children do get left out. And I think the reason for that is the first child is so exciting, and it's all consuming because you've never had children before, and the parents are doting all over it, and the extended family is excited, and all of these things. And they're always kind of special because they're the first grandchild, the first child. And then when you have number two, if you just have two kids, it usually balances out pretty nicely because there's not as much competition as when you add a third, a fourth, et cetera, et cetera. So when a third comes along, what happens to the second child? Well, the older child has that established bond as the first, and then there's a new baby that needs all this attention and care. So what happens to the middle child? A lot of times they get neglected. And so that middle child syndrome that people talk about, like, oh, he's a middle child, meaning there's something wrong with them, or they're screwed up because they're the middle kid. I don't believe that all middle children are screwed up or anything like that. But I do believe that quite often, and more often than not, the middle children often get very sort of passed over or neglected. And the babies tend to be closest to mom and dad because older sibling is kind of adventuring and jumping into the world, and the baby's being coddled, and like, where's the middle kid? So there's so many interesting dynamics that go on. And then, of course, we have sibling rivalry, and a very real thing, not a myth. Again, if we're comparing and mirroring our brothers and sisters from, the time we're born until the time we die, literally, I believe that. If we're constantly mirroring them, then if we see that our brothers or sisters really excel at things and are getting attention for excelling at these certain things, and we are unable to excel at these things, that can cause some competition there. Brothers can be very competitive. Sisters can be very competitive. And sometimes I believe that when you have one of each sex, male and a female, or two males and two females, it's a little bit easier of a dynamic for some reason that I can't really get into tonight because that's a whole other topic. But when you have like a couple of brothers and all of them are good in sports except one, the one who's not good in sports is going to feel really bad about himself. But if he grew up with a bunch of brothers that weren't good at sports, it would not be an issue. So the roles that our brothers and sisters play are huge. If we have a sister who is skinny and beautiful and gets all the guys, and we are, unattractive and, can't get a boyfriend, we are going to have some really serious feelings of insecurities, and we're going to a little bit have that rivalry. Kids compete for their parents' attention. They may compete for the oldest's attention or the youngest attention. So there's so many different dynamics that can happen that as siblings grow older and they get ready to leave the house and they become adults, they start reflecting back and they start thinking about our childhood and what was it like. And they look back on their childhood, as we all do. We all look back on our childhood as a mirror, and we look at our brothers and sisters to better understand who we are and understand who our parents are. And as we become adults and we start making our own families and making our own ways, sometimes that's where some of the brother-sister dynamics can get really, really ugly. And if you notice, the brother-sister dynamics are usually okay in childhood, or they're closer in childhood a lot of the time. Not all the time, but some of the time. And why is that? Well, I think that's because as siblings go out of the house and they make their own way and they start establishing their own lives, there's more competition, there's more rivalry, there's more codependency, there's competition over, who goes where for the holidays, and who spends more time with the grandkids and with whose grandkids, and whose kids are getting more than the other ones. And the dynamics just grow and grow and grow because you're adding more and more dynamic and more people into the growing family. And that's where I think brother and sister relationships often start to get funny, especially if one of the siblings marries somebody that the other siblings don't like, or if the person that a sibling marries is jealous of the closeness between the brothers and sisters. I mean, I've seen it both ways. Things can get really ugly. And if you have a sibling that has, issues with, drugs and alcohol, a lot of times the other siblings will, come together and try to sort of protect themselves from the issues that stem from the addict, or from, they'll kind of join together to cut off the addict, or one sibling may be enabling the addict. And there's just, oh my gosh, I mean, I could go on for 15 shows about all the different dynamics that happen with brothers and sisters. And it's very interesting to watch some of my older clients who, are in their 70s and 80s to kind of take a look at what their relationships are like with their siblings, and how it even changes from generation to generation to generation. And I'll be interested to see what the younger generation does as far as brothers and sister relationships going forward, now that we have cell phones and social media involved, because again, that's more things that could sort of throw off that dynamic. But ultimately, I think all children are seeking their place in the world, but before they can get out into the world to find their place, they find their place within that family unit. And the role that they play, that somehow they get put into in the family dynamic. And oftentimes those roles that we either, chose to be in or got put in by our parents or other siblings, we tend to live those out for a lifetime. And not until we really step back and take a look at it, or maybe go to therapy, do we start to really understand those dynamics and how they play out in our adulthood. It's very interesting. Let me take a look and see if anyone is asking me anything interesting. Hello, good evening to everybody, and thank you for saying glad. I'm number 6 of 7 sisters. We had a wonderful upbringing. Our parents were the best. Missed them. Yes, first friends. We all choose different paths. I'd rather be alone than deal with their trauma. Yeah, and sometimes that happens. And I imagine with 7 siblings, you're going to have a lot of, subgroups, we call it, in family therapy. So, there's no way that 2 parents can really properly, I don't have any experience with it, but it would be very challenging for parents to be able to really attend to all of those kids. I don't know how you do it. I mean, I don't. I mean, that's so, I would imagine that, Catherine, in your family, there's a lot of subsystems. And because they're our first friends, and they're our best friends as children, and the people that we're, the closest to, we also have that expectation that we talk about so much in the show about how, there's an expectation that because we're blood and because we're family and because we grew up together, we're supposed to be close. And then, of course, when there's, disappointment and drama, within the sibling group, then, it can be so hurtful, because not only are you losing a family member and someone that you grew up with and that really, gets you on some level, they're not perfect, and they're not always going to turn out the way, those relationships are not always going to turn out the way you want them. And you lose both a family member and a friend when you have to part with a sibling, or you lose a sibling, or you have to, for whatever reason, cut a sibling out of your life. It's devastating. It really is devastating. And I do believe that brothers and sisters, have a certain connection that's always there. And you can be, anywhere in the world, and you could not talk for, 20 years, but there's still going to be some feeling there just by some shared energy. I don't know how to explain it. But being brother and sister doesn't guarantee that the friendships or that you shared, or the closeness that you shared, is always going to be there. I mean, there's no way to guarantee that. There's no way to know that that will happen. There's no guarantee. So, as we go out into the world and, start establishing our own lives, it's very difficult when it turns out not the way you want it to. And oftentimes what gets in the middle of our sibling relationships are things like drugs and alcohol, different types of addictions, and seeing our parents kind of be, I don't want to say maybe abused or taken advantage of in order for, so you see the one sibling maybe taking advantage of mom and dad, and then all the other siblings try to protect mom and dad from that sibling. And all those boundaries get crossed, and you can have a lot of family drama. And, what I'm hearing in the comments is that, there's been a lot of drama, a lot of family drama with your brothers and sisters. And if you'd like to share any of that, of course you can. And I would be happy to try and comment on it. But I think that if you are honestly doing some self-reflection or doing some therapy and you're having some issues, you definitely want to look at the sibling relationships, because it very much dictates who we are, the road that we walk. Even if we're not close with them, that in itself is a dynamic to look at. If you don't speak to your brother or you don't speak to your sister, why? What are the patterns there, and how did you arrive at that choice to, cut them out of your life? And do you feel complete, in a sense, without them? And there's a lot of theories that say you can't ever really feel fully complete without having some sort of connection to your siblings. I certainly don't know if that's true or not, but I do think that when you have that experience in childhood with all these other human beings, that there's a special connection, and when that connection cannot be maintained or it has to be cut off, it's a devastating loss. And it's another, sort of disappointment that sometimes our family doesn't always turn out the way we wished. And saying, goodbye to family members is very difficult. But again, the brother-sister is not only are you saying goodbye to your sister or your brother, but you're saying goodbye to a friend and somebody that helped very much define who you are, for better or for worse. So even if you had the crappiest brother or the crappiest sister in the world, that crappiness in some way impacted the way that you see the world, that you respond to the world, and that you will, I guess, sort of pay attention to or carry on that pattern in your other relationships. And why we blow off the sibling relationship in psychology and family therapy, I really think we do. We put so much more emphasis on the parents than we do the siblings, and I think we're missing a big piece of the pie. Now, something that I find really fascinating about brothers and sisters is that you can sit with a group of siblings, and I've done this many times. You sit with a group of siblings, and you hear them talking about their childhood, and it's amazing that everyone has a different perspective of the family, and especially of the parents. And of course, the reason that perspective can be so different from sibling to sibling is not only because they have a different lens and they're a different human being, and they take in information differently than the other person, but because they had a different and separate relationship with each parent. So your relationship with your mother or your father may have looked very different than your brother or your sister's, because you're all individual. And so while you're all living in the same house and you all came from the same two people and you share all of this similarity and all this experience, you still have different relationships with each parent. So that's what makes families so incredibly complex. And that's why I find family therapy to be so fascinating, because of all the different intersecting connections and relationships that we have inside that family system and inside that group. But I do always find it so interesting. One of the things that I think also has a lot to do with what our relationships with brothers and sisters will look like as far as closeness is the number of siblings that you have in the family. So if there's 2 or 3 of you, it's more likely that you're all going to be really close. When you start with 4, 5 kids and onward, you see the subgroups kind of splitting off. And you might have, well, this brother and sister are really close, but this sister and brother don't talk, or this one or that one, and it gets all crazy. And unfortunately, I find it's very few and far between that really large families stay really, really close and really connected. And I really attribute that to, many things, but one thing for certain is the more people you have in a family, the more personality differences you have in a family, and the more dynamics that you have in a family. And when you have all those, intersecting relationships happening, there's bound to be some chaos, because people love creating chaos, and it's very hard to get along under one roof with a bunch of people. Very difficult. So, but on the other hand, imagine what your life would have been like without your siblings. Or for those of you who maybe have lost a sibling, And then, of course, there's the rare occasion where people just really cannot stand their brothers and sisters, or they're just bad seeds, and, they're better off without them. But I think that's, less common. But the more siblings, the more people in the family, the more chance of conflicts. The less people in the family, the less dynamic, and, less chance of conflict. So, many people I know that have one child, just, it's a lot easier. You add another one in the mix. Okay, now you've upped the dynamic, a third, a fourth, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's something also to consider if you're trying to understand your sibling relationships, or You're trying to understand yourself by looking at your sibling relationships and looking at your relationships. Age difference has a lot to do with it as well. My two older brothers being so much older than me, more than a decade each, there wasn't a lot to fight about. We really didn't fight. They were my older brothers. I idolized them. I thought they were amazing. I really had no real issues with either one of them. Never really fought with them, disagreed or whatever, but, very smooth sailing relationships because I was a little sister. They were the big, big brothers. There was absolutely no competition. It was a very wonderful dynamic, very easy dynamic for me. There was no competition at all between me and my older brothers. My little brother, because we were so close in age, was a completely different story. I don't think we were competitive with each other. At least I wasn't competitive towards him. But it was a different relationship. We could be, we had some intersecting friend groups, and, we were a different generation, and we fought constantly because, it was just the two of us when we were little kids, and, that's what we did. But we also shared a lot of, wonderful experiences together too. So when we're looking, again, to understand the brother-sister dynamic, we're looking at such a rich, complex system of personalities, system of relationships, and dynamics that are just buzzing all over the place. And I think that while they're our first best friends, they can also be our first betrayals, our first heartbreak, and the most disappointing heartbreak that could ever happen to us because of all that closeness that we share. And so, if you have issues or problems getting along with your siblings, it's not something to take lightly, and it's something that I would encourage everyone to get therapy for. And, a lot of times when we think of going to therapy, we think of going because of our romantic partners or maybe our kids or our parents, but we don't often think about, well, geez, I really have this problem with my sister or this problem with my brother, so I'm going to go to therapy. I do get people who come to me for that, but it's minimal. And I don't think it's minimal because the issues don't exist. I think it's minimal because we think, oh, well, we don't connect the need there. But I think even going to therapy with your siblings, if you're having issues, is a good idea if it's, not an abusive situation or something like that. But if you are going through a really difficult dynamic, a really difficult situation with a brother or sister, or you're estranged from your brothers or sisters or anything of the like, I encourage you to reach out. I would love to, talk to you about it and help you, maybe fix that relationship, or perhaps the opposite. Learn how to say goodbye to that relationship if it's really destructive. And that is a huge situation and a huge loss that, again, I wouldn't take lightly. Quite the age range in our family, from 52 to 68. Oldest sister had a son when I was 4. Oh, wow. He was more like my baby brother. Our birthdays are 2 days apart, celebrated together. Oh, my gosh. He passed in a car accident at the age of 8. Oh, that's heartbreaking, Catherine. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, you do need to write a book. I would be so interested in hearing about it. And yes, larger families are more complex. Yeah, one of my best friends growing up, she had 7 sisters. And it was so interesting watching the different subgroups. Like my friend was the second youngest, and so she was like in the younger subgroup, and then the older subgroup, and it was like the older 4 and the younger 3, and there were 7 of them total. So when there was the older 4 kind of stuck together and the younger 3 stuck together, and not typical for them to cross, you know, at holidays and stuff, but the little groups were so tight of these sisters. And I just saw a picture of all of them on Facebook the other day. I couldn't believe, you know, it's been so many years, but that was a really complex dynamic because of all those girls, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely encourage people to reach out and get help, and don't be afraid or ashamed to go to therapy because of an issue with your siblings, because, again, our siblings are just, they're everything, and they are, again, just the very first friendship that we have. They could be possibly, you know, the closest thing to us, even more so than our parents, because we are, you know, again, if it's an all biological family, you know, you share that genetic component, and you share that, you know, that shared emotional experience, even though it could be very different. And even if you make the choice that I can no longer have this brother or this sister in my life because of addiction, or, you know, whatever the issue is, they're abusive in whatever way, I think you have to properly say goodbye in a way that it's almost like a death, because in a way it is. Because when you lose a brother or sister, whether it's because of bad behavior on their part or because of whatever reason, it's losing a part of yourself. And it's painful, and it's disappointing. And if we can somehow get help saying goodbye in a way that's meaningful, or if there's any way that that relationship can be, you know, somehow salvaged, I think it's important to talk about it with a professional. And, you know, who knows what you'll discover when you do that? Who knows? It's very interesting. Sometimes brothers and sisters come in and out of each other's lives. It's interesting. But anyone who's lost a sibling that they loved understands how, you know, you do feel like you lose a part of you, and you are losing a part of yourself, and it is hard to recover from that, and you are losing your role model or your best friend or whatever. And so maybe if it's not loss, but it's, again, it's a choice, you know, that is something that needs to be, you know, processed, I believe, and worked through with a professional who cares about you and can help you and sort of hold your hand through that. So I'm going to leave it there, but I opened up with, you know, Madonna's song, I can't believe Facebook didn't shut me down, Keep It Together. I couldn't help myself because it talks about brothers and sisters and family, and it's got a great beat. So I'm going to take us out with that too. And I thank you guys for watching Liz Live, and I will be back here Saturday morning. If I have any voice left, I will be back here Saturday morning at 11 a.m. with an interesting topic that I will post and let you guys know what it's about. And until Saturday, I'll see you then. Have a great night. And where is that song? It's gone. Okay. That's okay. Good night, everybody.